I'm legitimately so impressed that the Seahawks and the Patriots made it to this year's Super Bowl. Not just because this is the first time in history that both teams had 60 to 1 odds or longer of making it this far, which is fitting for Super Bowl 60, but also because both teams had such vastly different approaches to many of the key areas of their team builds. There are plenty of similarities too, of course. All the best teams share some DNA, but it's striking how different their methods were of choosing a head coach, a quarterback, and so much more. It's cool that two differing team building journeys can both end up at the same place. At times, these teams made a tried and true choice, but at others, they went well off the beaten path. I'm going to dissect all of that in this video. You're watching Light Boxes, a football show that helps you think outside the box about the NFL. I'm your host, Rob Ballantyne. Please remember to like, leave a comment, and subscribe to this channel. Doing those things helps grow this community, and I'd appreciate it so much. We got to start at the top with the head coaches. Now, the similarity is that they're both defensive head coaches named Mike. But the differences between them and the differences between everything I'm going to touch in this video have more to do with how the teams landed these guys. The Patriots went with a more traditional approach in that they hired a head coach who'd already had success elsewhere as a head coach in the NFL. Mike Vrabel was with the Titans previously, and he had led them to multiple playoff appearances and the AFC 1 seed in 2021. He did really well there, and the best quarterback he had was Ryan Tannehill. Now the Patriots, they had let Bill Belichick, despite all his greatness, sort of tail off and run the franchise into the ground. Then they had another terrible year with Gerard Mayo as the coach, and so they just needed somebody to come in and fix the franchise. We see retread coaches like this work. Andy Reid went from Philly to Kansas City. John Fox went from Carolina to Denver. Most recently in this coaching cycle, John Harbaugh goes from the Ravens to the Giants. Kevin Stefanski goes from the Browns to the Falcons. This happens often, but sometimes those coaches are given a year off between jobs where they can soak things in, reevaluate their processes, figure out how they want to lead their next team. Sean Payton went from the Saints to the Broncos. He was traded, but he had a year off and then was moved over to Denver. Mike McCarthy had a year off after being fired from the Cowboys, and now he's the Steelers coach. So we see this happen all the time. Mike Vrabel falls into the latter category. His year off technically was as a coaching and personnel consultant for the Cleveland Browns, but he had a year off between the Titans and the Patriots from being the key decision maker for a franchise. Now, the Seahawks went a different direction. In fact, their legend, Pete Carroll, they let him go before the decline really started to show, whereas the Patriots kept Belichick through it all. Now, Pete Carroll has 1 Super Bowl ring instead of 6, so that matters, of course. But they decided to move on before he went over the cliff, and they found a hotshot coach in his 30s in Mike Macdonald. Now, hiring a hotshot head coach in his 30s, it is also an in vogue method. Not nearly as in vogue as the retread head coach, but you've seen it with Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan, most recently Ben Johnson. But all of those guys are offensive-minded head coaches. This is one of the rare instances where a team is taking their shot on a young guy who's on the defensive side of the ball. The only other big one that I can think of is Raheem Morris, and that didn't work out in 2 different scenarios. Now, another name you might think of would be DeMeco Ryans of the Texans, but I put him in a different category because he's a former player. So yes, he's a brilliant mind who's come up through the coaching ranks, but he also had a decade or so long of playing in the NFL. That builds up a lot of cachet with players. To be a young head coach without NFL playing experience, it can be harder to win over the locker room and convince guys that you can help them win. So Mike Macdonald is really the first instance of a hotshot head coach on the defensive side of the ball to lead his team well without having played in the NFL. Now, when we talk about offensive coordinator hires, it flips. The Seahawks were the one to be more traditional, and the Patriots went more outside the box. Now, the most traditional thing you can do with an offensive coordinator hire is pick someone you've worked with before as a head coach, and neither Mike Vrabel nor Mike Macdonald did that. But probably the second most traditional approach is to look at a very successful coaching tree and pluck from it. The Seahawks did that by plucking Clint Kubiak off of the Kyle Shanahan coaching tree. Many of Kyle Shanahan's offensive assistants go on to be head coaches at some point, like Mike McDaniel was for the Dolphins. And Clint Kubiak is probably going to be the Raiders head coach once this Super Bowl is over. But in the meantime, Kubiak spent 1 year as the offensive coordinator in New Orleans. It didn't work out there, but Mike Macdonald saw Kubiak's potential and brought him in this year as his OC, thinking we move him from a bad situation to a good one and let him cook. Kubiak also spent 1 year in San Francisco with Sam Darnold, who the Seahawks will sign in free agency, and we're going to cover that. And so that's another way in which they were thinking about the progression of their team build. But the Patriots, they didn't bring in anybody that Mike Vrabel had worked with previously, nor somebody that had a history with the quarterback Drake May. They went back to the well again on offensive coordinator Josh McDaniels. This is his third stint with the New England Patriots. Now, Vrabel did play linebacker for the Patriots when Josh McDaniels was the OC the first time around in 06 to 08, but that's not really the same as working together, and it's been so many years since then. At the time, a lot of people thought it was a move that lacked inspiration. Maybe the owner, Robert Kraft, insisting that they try to recreate the glory days with the OC hire. I mean, bringing in Mike Vrabel, a former Super Bowl winning player, as your head coach was already feeding into that narrative. But McDaniels has been an excellent hire. He's really helped develop Drake May. His offense works with the pieces that they have. It's working wonders. And the biggest black marks on McDaniels' reputation, they're from him attempting to be a head coach. He clearly does not have the disposition for that role. But as an OC, it's a good fit. He's had so much success with the Patriots, and surprisingly, running the formula back has just been a good idea in New England. Now we finally get to the quarterback position. Now both were picked third overall. One played for UNC, one played for USC. But that's about where all the similarities end. The Patriots got Drake May with the most common method used to acquire a quarterback. You're bad, and so you select one early in a draft the following year. The Patriots took Drake May third overall in the 2024 draft. Now, not all quarterbacks make it to the Super Bowl in their second year, and when you limit it just to players drafted in the top half of the first round to make it to the Super Bowl in their second year, it's only Joe Burrow of the Bengals and Ben Roethlisberger of the Steelers. Ben even won his Super Bowl, so that's on the table. Most of the early drafted quarterbacks, it takes time before they're fully realized. But while the Patriots QB has been impressive, the Seahawks one has been largely unprecedented. See, the Seahawks attached themselves to Sam Darnold in free agency back in March, and they attached themselves to a journeyman with only a brief track record of success and gave him the almost non-existent mid-level quarterback contract. At $33.5 million a year, he's the 18th highest paid quarterback in the league. There's another guy right next to him. It's Baker Mayfield at $33.3 a year. Below that is Justin Fields at $20 million, which everybody knew was a gross overpay at the time, and then Daniel Jones at $14 million. And then the rookie contract guys like Drake May. Those guys are making less than half of what Baker and Darnold make. Baker was drafted first overall in the same draft as Darnold, and has also been a journeyman. They were even on the Panthers roster together, until he found a home with the Bucs in 2023. Baker's deal sets the stage for the mid-level contract Darnold would get next, but a key difference is that the Bucs had actually signed Mayfield to a 1-year, $4 million deal first, then gave him the bigger deal as an extension after he proved it in their building. The Seahawks, meanwhile, brought Darnold in at his current number with no previous history with him. So they just liked what they saw on tape enough and believed in where he was heading. They believed that he was a late bloomer who still had room to grow. And that's a huge risk. But on the other side, they're also not paying a lot. They're paying more than you would for a rookie quarterback, but they're not even close to the $60 million mark that tops this league. And so they have this interesting mid-level contract that almost doesn't exist. It gets them a solid enough quarterback late enough into his career that he's mature enough to handle the ups and downs of a season and eventually get you to a Super Bowl. But they also have enough extra money to play around with the rest of the roster. It's a narrow road to take, but they've seemingly done it to perfection. I'm going to talk about the wide receiver cores and the secondaries next. And with both of these position groups, I want us to focus on the gravity that particular players have, how other players orbit around them in order to have a high level unit. Of course, both groups need to have depth in order to survive, but I really want us to focus on particular players who lift up the rest of their teammates. In the wide receiver category, the Seahawks have Jackson Smith-Njigba as their number one. They drafted him in the first round of 2023. While they had DK Metcalf on the roster, and he was a good receiver in his own right, they also had Tyler Lockett, and even though he was aging, he was playing well at the point at which they drafted JSN. But they were preparing for the future. The new coaching staff joined in 2024, and they saw enough development from Jackson Smith-Njigba to feel comfortable trading DK Metcalf in his athletic prime this offseason, knowing the bulk of the offense could rest on JSN's shoulders. Boy, were they right. JSN led the league in receiving yards and target share in 2025, and he's either going to win Offensive Player of the Year or finish second to the Rams' Puka Nacua. He has been impressive. He's lifted up every wide receiver that he's worked with, as well as the quarterback Sam Darnold. To say the New England Patriots have had trouble drafting wide receivers early recently would be a massive understatement. In the first and second round, their busts at wide receiver include Jalen Polk in 2024, and the Patriots traded out of that pick, which would become Ladd McConkey, to take Polk later. They took Tyquan Thornton in 2022. The next receivers were George Pickens and Alec Pierce. And they took N'Keal Harry in 2019. The next receivers were Deebo Samuel and A.J. Brown. Thankfully, they hit on Pop Douglas and especially Kayshon Boutte in the 6th round of 2023. But those are both depth pieces. They're good ones, but they're not wide receiver ones. This offseason, they said, F it. We're paying somebody in free agency, somebody with a track record. And they landed on Stephon Diggs, despite being 32 years old and coming off of a torn ACL. The Patriots actually tried to pay Calvin Ridley, who was a couple years younger, but he chose the Tennessee Titans instead. They tried to pay Chris Godwin, still younger, also coming off an injury, but not necessarily as serious of a one, and he stayed with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But the Patriots were more than happy to get Diggs. He's been really, really good for them, and he's had a very similar effect on Drake May as he did back in Buffalo all those years ago with a different quarterback in the Patriots division, Josh Allen. Yeah, they were hoping that they could recreate that magic, and just like recreating the Josh McDaniels magic, bringing in Diggs has worked wonders. They knew Diggs couldn't be the long-term answer at this point, but they wanted to microwave the wide receiver core for 2025, and it's gotten them to the Super Bowl. Moving on to the secondary, and the Patriots take on the role of conventional this time. They have two lockdown boundary corners who are sticky in man coverage and can do whatever you ask of them from that alignment. They drafted Christian Gonzalez 17th overall in 2023. He was a steal at the time. Many people, including myself, had him as a top 10 player in that draft. Devon Witherspoon, who we'll talk about in a bit, went before him. That made sense, but Emmanuel Forbes going ahead of him didn't. And the Patriots got to take Gonzalez basically for free. And then they signed Carlton Davis this year in free agency. The two of them have been an awesome boundary corner pair. They're really, really difficult to match up against. And I do think this is the best cornerback duo that Jackson Smith-Njigba has faced in weeks. So the passing game for Seattle is going to have a harder time than it has recently. But Davis and Gonzalez line up on the outside almost all of the time. So the advantages that they're giving you in talent can be sort of offset by predictability of where they're going to be. However, the Seahawks secondary is built around Devon Witherspoon, who I mentioned earlier. He was the 5th overall pick in 2023, and Nick Emanwari, 50th overall this year, and a finalist for Defensive Rookie of the Year. And you can see from these numbers, their deployment is far less predictable than of their counterparts in New England. Emanwari is even on the defensive line an 8th of the time, which is really unheard of for most safeties. He is a jack of all trades, and so is Witherspoon. Part of why they can align these players in the interior of the defense as often as they do is because they are excellent run defenders. Emanwari is a tank, but Witherspoon is pretty small by many cornerback standards. Yet he is a monster tackler who thrives in those chaotic environments on the interior of the formation, and he loves coming downhill to hit a ball carrier. So even though Davis and Gonzalez are both lockdown corners in their own way, you're getting such an advantage by being malleable and disrupting the run as much as you disrupt passing lanes. Now, head coach, offensive coordinator, quarterback, wide receiver core, secondary, these are all areas where they took different approaches, even though they ended up with relative levels of success near each other. But one area in which they're almost identical is their commitment to building their interior defensive lines. Edge defenders like Myles Garrett, they get most of the publicity, and there's good reason for it. But the Chiefs built multiple Super Bowl winning defenses around defensive tackle Chris Jones, and plenty of teams have really started adopting a philosophy of fortifying the interior of their defense, and in particular, making sure you've got two really good guys in that unit. This Patriots regime's biggest free agent signing was DT Milton Williams, who won a Super Bowl with Philly last year. They paired him with Christian Barmore, and they've been an incredible duo. This Seahawks regime's first ever draft pick was Byron Murphy II, 16th overall in 2024. They paired him with Leonard Williams, voted to his first All-Pro team this season, and they've been arguably an even better duo. The other two teams that made the championship round also have great D-tackle pairs. The Rams have Kobe Turner and Poona Ford. The Broncos have Zach Allen and DJ Jones. Edge rushers are more likely to finish a play in a sack, since they have the closing speed to chase down a quarterback, and they're coming from angles that are harder for the quarterback to see. But it could be argued that a good pass-rushing defensive tackle is better at curtailing explosive plays. They disrupt the timing of passing plays by crushing the middle of the pocket more quickly, since that's the space that the quarterback wants to sit patiently and wait for his receivers to come open downfield. Even if the quarterback escapes the crumbling pocket, now it's scramble drill time, and so explosive plays might still happen, but they're not happening by design anymore, and so the percentage of success inevitably goes down. Not allowing explosive plays is as important or more so than generating sacks. On top of this, interior defenders are more often responsible for run stuffs, keeping a run to 0 or 1 yards instead of 3 or 4 yards. If a team is running the ball on schedule, they're going to be in favorable down and distances, and they can hunt those explosive plays more safely. But when you get a run stuff, now you're in worse situations, and you just got to get the ball past the chains. This puts the defense on the front foot. Edge rushers, of course, are valuable to have too, and Seattle has the advantage there with DeMarcus Lawrence. With many other aspects of these teams so evenly matched, I could see Lawrence making 3 or 4 key plays in the backfield and being the reason the Seahawks won the game. In fact, he would be my dark horse pick for Super Bowl MVP, which so often goes to a quarterback, and it hasn't gone to a defender since Broncos edge rusher Von Miller in Super Bowl 50, 10 years ago. But these teams ultimately are well matched, so I won't be surprised if either team wins this game. Aside from their shared focus on building the interior of the defensive line, they took wildly different paths to reach this point, to build their conference champion teams. And I'm really excited to see which set of philosophies comes out on top. So, who do you think will win, and why? Leave a comment down below. Also, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Doing those things would mean the world to me. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Light Boxes. I'm Rob Ballantyne. Enjoy the big game, and I'll see you soon.